So today we're at the Hawkins building at the Science Innovation Park in Wroughton, just outside of Swindon, and we're going on a tour. And this should be really interesting. Oh, this way. Been looking forward to this. Look how big the building is. It's huge.
And just to take in the enormity of the building, because sometimes people come in here and it's just like, oh my god, this is incredible. You know, it just takes a while for everything to sink in. So, if you just take a few minutes, if you say want to take a few photos, then that's fine. Some people may have seen pictures of this in the media, in newspapers and online, but it's not until you're actually here. This is an electric car. It's battery powered, and it dates from 1916. So if you think about it, it's, you know, what we've got now, it's like history repeating itself, basically. This was produced in the United States, in Detroit, by the Detroit Car Company. And you may be fascinated to know that in 1916, in the United States, electric cars were almost level pegging with the internal combustion engine cars that were coming out at the time. And it was a very close run thing as to which form of propulsion was going to win out between electric and petrol internal combustion. Now, if you think about it, internal combustion was in its infancy, and the reliability of those engines was not so good, whereas electric had been around for an awful lot longer. Electric motors, electric propulsion have been around for quite some time, and it was a tried and tested form of propulsion for, you know, larger objects, certainly like railway locomotives. Now, this in itself made this actually quite popular by way of actually having a car, an electric car. It had a range of around about 50 miles, which isn't brilliant.
You can have any colour you like, as long as it's black.
Now, this beast of an object here, you know, no guesses as to what it's used for. It is a mobile X-ray lorry, but it's got a really good story to it. The fact that this was actually out and about during the 1950s. Now, the question that may be in a lot of people's minds is that while looking at some of these vehicles, you think they're not in the greatest of condition, some of them. And if you look at that particular vehicle there, that's a steam-powered car, and you'd be absolutely right. It's a bit of a strange vehicle, to say the least. This is a milk float, and this at one time was the world's fastest milk float. Anybody mention Ernie? those of you who remember the days when we had open days in the hangars may have actually seen this in one of the hangars. There's an interesting recent story attached to the Swindon lorry, the Swindon flatbed. Just before last Christmas, somebody got in contact with me and said, I donated my old Swindon lorry in 1979. Yeah, just in case you're wondering, obviously we've got some quite heavy-duty torture equipment to actually get these up onto the shelves. So if you think of these are just objects like anything else. They've all got a barcode. All these locations have actually got barcodes as well. So we took some school children around all last week. A lot of them thought it was a giant ice cream cone. At which point I asked the question, how many ice creams do you think you could actually fit in there? One of our volunteers who was helping us said, never enough. This is actually a nose cone from a Concorde, and it's unused. So BAE, who donated this to us, this was basically just a spare nose cone. If anything, if one of the flying Concordes, of which there was 20 I think, was damaged, they could always swap it over for this one and then.
Expedition that they put in with the snowcat, yeah.
Yeah. There's that.
And you can see a little orange one just in front of it.
Brilliant.
Outside, which used to be the main gate. And then one day it just disappeared, and nobody knows where it went. So I don't know if BT come along or something like that, I'm not sure. Okay, what we're going to look at now, everybody, this is obviously one of the largest objects that we've got. This is actually the largest object in this building. We've got larger objects, but they're in the hangars. Yeah, no surprises. This is a Glasgow tram. Still operating horse-drawn trams on their network, and it was quite a large network. They then wanted to electrify the system. Now, if you think about what we said a bit earlier about the battery, the electric car, the battery-powered car, electricity was a tried and tested form of propulsion. So Glasgow made the switch from horse-drawn trams to electric trams. They quickly found out that they didn't have enough electricity. The top doesn't really quite fit in, and it becomes obvious that it's been added to later on. So the top was added in the 1930s to actually increase capacity. Now, this has got a really, really good story attached to this particular object. Now, if we move to 1914, at the start of the First World War, there was an awful lot of men up and down the country that were volunteering to fight with the armed services, which meant in a lot of traditional jobs, which were dominated by men, there was a manpower shortfall. None more so than Glasgow Corporation. And they found that a lot of the men were actually volunteering for the armed services. There wasn't enough men to keep this service running. So what did they do? They asked the ladies of Glasgow, would you like to train to become conductors on here? we've got a lot of weird objects as well. Get everybody round. Some of you may have worked out is a tunnel boring machine, and it's an absolute beast of a machine. Obviously, we know about the Channel Tunnel that's in place now, that goes from England to France. And some of you may know of previous attempts to go put a tunnel in between England and France. I remember as a child in the 1970s, I think there was an attempt to put a tunnel through. There was a much earlier attempt in Victorian times to put a tunnel through. Not as well. One of the attempts wasn't so well documented. Is the 1920s attempt, and this is what this is from. So this is from the 1920s attempt to put this tunnel through from Britain to France. If anybody has any questions about anything that you see, please do ask. We might not have the answers to everything, but we'll do our best to answer any questions.
Plastic protected or just
no, they are protected. Everything that you see, they're called bubble crates, and these are actually put on prior to their move from the hangars. Now, we've got about 1,000 ship models, but that's not. They come from a bigger collection, and we have the smaller collection of these models. The National Maritime Museum has the biggest chunk of that, but at one time they were all one part of a single collection.
Where is the National Maritime Museum?
In Greenwich.
In Greenwich?
Yeah. But the polythene crates, they were initially put on prior to the move, because obviously, we can't have things like this being exposed to wind and air outside if they're being moved from a hangar over to here.
Ramsgate to
You'd be surprised what you find in here. When we was unpacking and we were amazed by some of the stuff. It was so old, it was stuff that you were taught in school that you never thought existed.
the stuff we grew up just take for the kids now. Show them Bangalore. The washerboard. We can do that in front of the fire.
If it's everything is good to go, we can then turn around and say, yeah, we can have that in the exhibition. If there's anything that needs to be sorted out. Having said that, some of these objects have been in the collection for well over 100 years, and hardly anybody's ever seen them. So the opportunity television dolly.
Oh yes.
So that comes from the BBC Heritage Collection. There would have been a camera mounted onto that. Right, I'm going to talk about another object, or another series of objects now, in the collection. And is an iron lung, which obviously many people will have heard of. Iron lungs were developed in the United States. This particular model was designed by a chap called Drinker, who was American. Now, we've talked about tuberculosis. Another scourge of society that used to go round was poliomyelitis. So polio was a really debilitating disease. So he then travelled to Britain. Britain had a polio epidemic as well at the time, and he had a meeting with William Morris, who was Lord Nuffield, head of Morris Motor Cars at the time. Told him about what he could do, And he said, but I just need somebody to manufacture these. We need a manufacturing facility. William Morris said, you know what, I've got a car factory. He said, I can devote a whole chunk of that to produce these. And that's what happened. So Morris Motors in Oxford actually set about producing huge amounts of these wooden iron lungs, and one of which is a bit further down. And they were really successful. They produced over 1,000 of them, and they were sent to all corners of the Commonwealth. So it's one of those really good things that, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it's so interesting. Only car. I had Star Fever. Star Fever in the 1970s, when I was really little. When the doctor said, "Oh, you've got scarlet fever," my mum nearly keeled over because she thought, "No." You can obviously see that this particular wall here, you think that's the end of the building. This is a little bit deceptive. This is not the end of the building. It's all going to be contained and nothing can be spread in here. And we'll actually power the whole building on solar. Yeah. Already. It was a very special washing machine. We've got more than enough capacity down at the far end there on the upper levels. We can put any object anywhere. Now, remember what we were saying about barcodes? Every location's got a barcode as well. So it doesn't matter where we put it. It doesn't need to be close to another. And most of what we've got is donated. There have been, on occasions, very, very rarely, a time when it's not using it actually for an auction or something like that. But it's got to be phenomenally important for us to be able to do that. And effectively, it hardly ever happens. I mean, it's once in a generation that would happen. What we do, we look at the objects, inquiries that come in. Now, part of my role, I take tours around once a week. Part of my role is actually looking through objects from the 1970s. I certainly do. It's one of the iconic BBC TV studio cameras. Really successful. These things lasted for about 30 years of continuous use. And the only reason why they stopped using them is because the mechanism which works the zoom basically just wore out in these. But you remember these from things like Blue Peter, Top of the Pops was another one. Somebody said another TV show from the 1970s which they remember. Science and Media Museum up in Bradford. So that's the reason why they sort of tend to cluster around this area. You said about children's characters in the Science and Media Museum at Bradford. We've also got the original wooden tops. Billy Ben as well. One of the interesting objects that we've seen here in the cabinet at the back there, that's a Windsurst machine, and it's an early way of generating electricity to use in laboratories. And we have got loads of those. I mean, it's all shapes and sizes, from the really big ones, even bigger than that, to some of the smaller ones, which we used in laboratories up and down the country back in Victorian times.
You walk around it.
Is a nuclear missile. And this is careful. You've got to be careful. Yeah, keep careful. So, it's blue steel. So this was Britain's ultimate line of defence right up until 1970. Now, this actually carried a 1 megaton nuclear warhead, and it would have been dropped from a Vulcan bomber. So the Vulcans would have had this underside. When the core went up, the Vulcans would have taken off, gone as far as they could towards the target. This would have been dropped. Rocket motors would have fired upon release, and then the missile would have carried on to its target. This is a little bit different, this one. This was a prototype, and because of that, it's got a different type of engine in it. So the rocket motor is different. So this is what, going back to those three things again, innovative, first of its kind. This was the first one to be made. There was about 58 of these produced in active service throughout the 60s, right up until 1970. In 1970, this was superseded by Polaris. Now, part of the reason why this fell out of favour and we stopped using it is because, if you think about it, it's quite obvious. If you're dropping this from an aeroplane, the aeroplane needs to operate from a base. The base is static. If you've got a base, the enemy will know where your air bases are. All they need to do is just bomb that area and target that, and it basically eradicates your nuclear capabilities. So with the Polaris system, it's fired from a submarine. And we've actually got a Polaris missile in one of the other hangars. And that was the reason why we switched from this type of system to the Polaris system, because you never know where the submarines are at any given time. And obviously, if you don't know, obviously, there's a good chance that the enemy doesn't know either.
Which one?
I've been told under the authority that the air in the building is circulated and filtered 3 times a day. We've got huge, great big filter systems outside. The air is massive. And then the filtered air comes through those nozzles. To a certain extent, but still does pressure, but nowhere near as it would be on a normal. For those of you who are interested, the Dalek, I think comes from the Sylvester McCoy era of Doctor Who.
That's fantastic.
Doesn't come from Narnia. This is a pretty, all-grade looking wardrobe, but it's got a story attached. A group of scientists who would invite people to volunteer to come down and stay at their facility for around about 10 days, and upon arrival you would be infected with a common cold virus, and they would then attempt to cure you of your symptoms. So surprisingly, there are quite a lot of people turn up. It didn't cost anything. You just rock up and say, I want to volunteer, and you'd stay there for 10 days, but you weren't allowed to leave the facility. So you'd be in a certain amount of huts. I'd imagine 10 days is quite boring because you couldn't go wandering out and about. But once again, it's one of those things where it's got a good connection with, you know, something that was quite groundbreaking at the time. Now, unfortunately, the common cold wasn't ever cured. With space exploration. In 2014, there was a mission plan called Rosetta, and the mission was to land a probe on a comet that was circling around. Now, if you think about it, it's ridiculously complicated. Comet is travelling at several thousand miles an hour, millions of miles away, and you're going to try and land a probe on it. I mean, it sounds insane. This was research that was carried out by the European Space Agency, the UK Space Agency, and also the Open University. In their planning to put this probe on a comet, one of the scientists said, you know what, the comet actually looks a bit like a rubber duck. So they thought, hang on, this is really good. What we'll do, we'll get a rubber duck. So we got a rubber duck, they come back, and then they started looking at possible landing sites within the rubber duck. So all these biro marks here are what the scientists and the astronomers were actually marked up as possible areas where they can actually land a probe. Now the probe was called Philae, and as a consequence the duck is called Philae. No, the other way around actually. It's Philae was the probe, this is called Philae. One there. So something that's really quite strange, you know, nothing unusual in that respect, but it's got a really strange story to it, and a really interesting story to it. What you'll see here is also, you know, lots of components of other things. A lot of the equipment here, quite frankly, I haven't a clue what it is. You know, I can do research on that. But it kind of like shows you to a certain extent, you know, the collection and you know how we operate. That some of it isn't always fantastic look. If you go yeah. It's extensive, but it's not exhaustive. Okay, everybody keep wandering now? To the Science Museum. These are actually being looked after by us for the Wellcome collection. Now, the Wellcome Trust and the Science Museum have had a long association. The Wellcome Trust collect things of a medical nature, and obviously medicine, technology, science, it all ties into what we've got. So it makes perfect sense, really. We've got call on their objects, they can call on our objects, we store their objects for them. We're going to go upstairs now. If there's anybody that would like to use the lift, please come upstairs. So anybody?
Coins and bits of metal. Yeah. So there's a
disabled, showing disabled people what that means.
There's no engine in that. What it is, it's a demonstration vehicle for different types of adaptation for disabled drivers. So the chairs with the seats inside them.
I assume done somebody's been told
There's
already.
two different types, one on one side and one on the other side, on the other end. And people can actually try it out. So being able to move from a wheelchair into a car seat. If one particular type doesn't work really for them, they can try the other type. Yeah, I'll be pleased to answer any questions anybody's got. Any thoughts? Looking behind you now, if you look here into the cabinets, you'll see. I'm not 100% certain, but I would turn around and say that it's probably got the world's largest collection of microscopes. I can't think of any organisation or institution that would have a larger collection, right from the very earliest to the most modern of scanning electron microscopes. So please take photos, looking down. I say it's a real glorious opportunity to have a look at what we've got.
Like
entirety, or
seems
as best you can.
nice.
So this represents how much of your collection, bearing in mind you've got the other area. I mean, you've got all the small stuff.
Yeah. So in this building alone, the official figure is around about 350,000 objects.
Yeah.
However, that accounts for around about 90% of the entire collection.
Right. All the other stuff's bigger and...
Yeah.
I know I've seen inside the other hangers when
Yeah.
they've got the open.
But this, I think, I think you'll agree that, when you peer into the hangar, you only see very small bits. This is a lot more impressive to be honest.
Yeah. I'm not saying very good working knowledge, but it's what you've got.
Yeah, I mean, the actual, the coloured sections on the grid, we've got 9,000 miles on the clock, which is very, very low mileage, to say the least. Yeah, that's an adaptive car. Wireless equipment, amplifiers, you know it. Yeah, we do. Honestly, people do get in contact with us and say, we're restoring something.
You know that?
Get it more settled, they will put it like
But if you get the opportunity, people, look up on their website about the tours that they offer here. They're not all the time, they're quite random. Try and get yourself down here and have a look round, because what I'm showing you is just a snippet of what will blow your mind as you walk around. So please, 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 just think for 1 minute, if they weren't doing this, who would be? You know, it's just incredible what's in there. Such a privilege, and the information was so well informed as we walked round. So really can recommend coming down here and spending an hour and a half with what I would say are incredible people that do incredible work to keep some of that history alive for us, and some of the most incredible storytelling. I think the tram one was one of my favourites, if I'm honest, and the Iron Lung. But I'm not going to go into great detail about what those were. You come down here, you give it a listen and see what you think. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. We're going to film all the way out, because the grounds are miles bigger than I thought they were. That's where we drove in, just down the bottom there. You'll remember that 5th gear, when Clarkson and that started the original 5th gear after they left Top Gear, they had a track that they went round, and it had Old Lady's House on. That's here. That's this bit of road that we were on earlier was part of that. And they're obviously investing here in new buildings. It's great to see. I've absolutely loved it.